there he is.
That's what I'm talking about. Kiss it.
There you go. See, nice. Nice.
That's a monster.
Look at that bad boy.
Look at that tough brother. Isn't he? Look at that. Yes, look at that. Nice. Look at that. It's another show.
Welcome to the Cain Pole Fishing Show. The Cain Pole Fishing Show is brought to you by Lewis Veterinary Downtown Clinic, Purdy's Coffee, Big Hill and Downtown, and the Paddy Wagon Irish Pub. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to a special edition of the Cain Pole Fishing Show. I'm super excited to have our guest Byron Artrip down here from Dayton, Ohio with Artrip Float Company. I've been talking to him back and forth for a long time now about getting him down here just to talk about the evolution of floats. I think when we first talked and we got on the phone, and I found your floats online. Some other guys were selling them way up north. I got super excited about them. I had no idea. I polled a couple of customers here. I said, hey, have you ever seen these floats? I said, yeah, we've seen them around, but we have to order them all the time though. And so I made a phone call. We immediately connected. You came down and visited the shop. We've talked a bunch since then. I think the last time we talked, it was like 45-minute phone call. And we just started really just brainstorming. And what I found, what was so awesome and interesting, is just the knowledge of floats, about floats that you have. And I just, it dawned on me, like, we should do this float show just about floats in general. And this isn't about picking on brands or what's better or what's wrong or anything. It's just about the entire evolution of floats and where they came from and what we used to fish with and what we grew up with. All the way up to, man, what they're doing today and the paint schemes and everything. And so first off, everyone out there, thank you for joining our show. This isn't our normal Wednesday night. We do our shows every other Wednesday, but this is a special opportunity for Byron to come down here and have this conversation with us. So over the next 50 minutes, I've got this menagerie of stuff that's under this desk right here that you can't see, but we're going to go through and talk a little bit about just the history of floats and what we call bobbers and why they were called bobbers and all kinds of stuff. But first off, Byron, why don't you introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, where you come from, Artrip, a little bit, and then we'll just kind of get started.
Okay. I'm Byron Artrip. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and I've pretty much fished all my life, and I've been making floats now, I hate to reveal my age, about 40 years, and I've learned a lot about floats over the years. I've learned that not all floats are created equal, and I've learned a lot of things about floats, that the intricate details of what makes a good float. I started out building floats when I was a teenager. I tried to make them, and there was an older man at the lake that fished. He was very good, Herb Klatt, very good fisherman and a float builder. So all of us that fished the lake and caught a lot of fish, we would go to Herb and buy our floats there because they were better than any of the floats on the market at that time. Well, one day I asked Herb, I said, could you show me how to make these floats? And he didn't much. He said, it's detailed and you wouldn't understand. So he didn't want to share much with me. So I went home and I got some balsa wood from a hobby shop. I tried to make some. They turned out pretty much like crap. But anyway, I took them over to Herb next time at the lake, and I showed him, and he looked at them and kind of laughed and everything. He said, well, you really want to know how to make those floats, don't you? And I said, yeah, I'd like to. He says, meet me at my house Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. Don't be late. And he's one of those guys, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're 15 minutes late. Right. So anyway, that's how.
He would not like me.
Anyway, that's how I got my start. Went over there, and he started showing me little things how to build it. He started me off slow like an apprentice, And so I started reporting over there every Saturday, all winter long. we built floats in his basement. That's what we did. And Herb fished a lot during the summer, so he didn't really want to build floats in the summer. All the floats he made during the winter, we would have them sold by July. They were gone. And you had to know him to get them. You couldn't just go up and buy them anywhere. They weren't in a store. So anyway, that's how I got my start. He started me off, taught me the basics of making fishing floats. But since then, over the years, we've tweaked things and modified a lot of the floats, actually made them better. And back then, we didn't have the paint and the materials that you have now. There's so much more available to make a nicer looking float, and so many more things to work with. We were limited back then. That was many years ago. But I think Herb would be proud if he seen what we had now compared to what we made then. But those floats helped us catch a lot of fish. Back then, the more fish you caught, we sold our fish at the lake. People would buy them. So the more you caught, the more money you made.
Right.
And so those floats helped us catch a lot more fish because it gave us an advantage over the floats that were available at that time.
And I think what's interesting is what you say is that, and before we get into anything, that floats make a big difference. I think that's what you've educated me on that the floats themselves change the perspective. And I think that a lot of us that we fish, we're like, we like that float because of the color, or just because we like that shape, or we want the old traditional red and whites, or we want those types of things. And so you've already educated us several. You've been here a lot today. You talked to a lot of our customers today.
Yes.
And you've educated a lot of them on why the floats are designed the way they are, and what was good and positive about all kinds. And we'll get into that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell you, you know, there's bobbers and there's floats, and what I tend, like we talked about this earlier too. Bobbers are, in my opinion, and what we call bobbers is what we used when we were kids. All of us starting out, we just used the old, you know, red and white bobber. Everybody at that time, they were cheap and inexpensive. You could get them, clamp on your line.
Yeah, you got all kinds up under the desk.
Sure.
I think you could see a picture, Randy, if you want to show the picture. Like there's, we took a picture earlier today, just all kinds of. I know some of them are different, but they're mostly these old red and white ones. I still sell a lot of these today.
You will,
a lot of them, right? And so what do you think was so, do you think it's just because it was just red and white, simple?
Well, I think it's because it's easy to use. These, let me try this one right here. These have a spring on the inside, you know, it's got a little hook here and clamps on here. It's so simple just to clamp this on your line and slide it up and down and throw out, and easy to use. And another thing, they're kind of heavy because they're plastic. And you take a child with a Zebco or something, and they don't have to throw it that hard to get this to go out there where they need it to go. But there's some downfalls to these floats, you know, some pros and cons. One of the worst things that happens is when this float right around the edge gets a little water in there, they tend to get waterlogged, and they don't work right. They're half sunk before you put your bait on, they're gone. Another thing that happens is the spring inside the float, it'll get weak, and it won't stay on your line at the depth you need it. It'll just slide up and down your line. Then you've got a long day trying to keep that float from So what I do, and we talked about this before, on the hook you can wrap your line around here and make it stay, you know, where you want it if it starts sliding. But
I mean I remember, listen, I'd wrap around 1, 2, 3. Some have some. These don't. But some of them have. I don't think we have any.
This one has one right here.
Yeah, where it's got the hook at the top too. So then you put it at the top, but then it make your float bobber sit like this sometimes.
And yeah, I never was a big fan of the hook on top, and there's several reasons why. When you hook it here and you hook it on top, and say you have a jig down here, and you're wanting to pull this in, you're pulling this whole bobber. And when you pull it, it's making your jig come at an angle like this, which you're not getting much action down here on your bait, whether you're using live bait or a jig. If you hook it right here on the bottom and you're twitching your rod tap, look at this, it's a pivot point there and it goes down to your bait, it rocks like this. Well, your bait stays more vertical and it has more action. And you can actually work it slower. So I know why they put the spring on top. Part of it, if it starts slipping down here, like I said before, you can hook it on here, just like we talked about wrapping around, and it'll stay put. So that's why they do that, but I'm not a fan of hooking it on top, just because you don't get the action on your
And
bait.
I think where you were going is that if you wrap it around the bottom 2 or 3 times like we've done before, then you create, just like anything, like we're bass fishing or anything else, you create a break point in that line,
You
right?
got it. Yep. Yep.
And as soon as you start, if you catch anything bigger, now you've created not only to your swivel, if you're using a swivel or your hook, you've got another break point right at that float. Right?
You're exactly right. And a lot of times, if you get excited and you catch a few fish and you don't check your line or anything, and you've got that wrapped around there, it's basically a pinch point. You have nothing. You just have from your float down to your fish, and that fish is pulling against the float. And what will happen when your line breaks, you say, oh, I lost him. You reel him in. Your float's coming in, but guess what? You don't have a leader or a bait down at the bottom.
That's right.
It broke right at that point.
I've done it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, something else you said, and I'll use this as an example because there's others as well. And you said today, it didn't really hit me until today when you said that, is that there's a lot of water to displace here.
Yes.
And so, although when a fish pulls this down, and I get this is a bigger float, and obviously, look, we can go to a smaller float, which is less water displaced. I get it.
Right.
But if you look at something like this compared to something that's very skinny, there's less water displaced, and so it's easier to pull down. And you said something about this is harder for the fish to pull.
Yes, it is. It's you're trying to pull this whole surface area, this round surface area, to get it to go down. Whereas if you have a float that's shaped, let's just grab one real quick. One of those right there would do. Grab one of those larger ones there and we'll show you the difference. Okay. Let's hold this up and hold this up. See the vertical and the V right in the float? When this goes down, you only have this round part on top. It's almost an inverse of this. It tends to go down a lot easier than trying to pull this thing around. I've seen a lot of times people have these floats, and sometimes they think the larger the bobber, the larger the fish, and it actually works against you. Yeah. Because I was telling you earlier, we have a kids fishing derby at work. We'll have about 50 to 100 kids show up. And my job is to walk around a lake. I have a vest full of hooks, bobbers, and everything. And it just seems to happen about every year. You'll have people with this float on. They're trying to catch, this lake is full of bluegill and crappie and bass, right? They're trying to catch those fish, those small fish with a big bobber like this, and you'll walk up and they'll be getting bites. It'll be pulling it all around, but it just can't get it to go down because it's almost like that poor fish is trying to pull a empty gallon milk jug under us and trying to get this float. Well, anyhow, what we do, I ask them, I usually change them out and put a smaller bobber on, little wire Aberdeen hook and a wax worm. They go from getting bites and having a float working, a fish working, trying to get it down, they start catching fish immediately just by changing the size of the float. And there again, small things make a big difference. Whether it's bass lures, fishing floats, you know that from bass fishing. Just a little change in color or design of a bait can turn you your success from a 0 to a hero just right now. Well, it's the same way with fishing floats. But anyway, I try to design most of my floats. If you'll look at all the floats I have, they all come to a taper on the bottom. And the reason for that, we said earlier, so they'll go down easier.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, so I think we've showed some, we got a picture of fishing floats up there. I think Randy showed some of those. And there are some old style ones. And listen, this is traditional, right?
Yes, yes.
We still sell a lot of them. They come in all kinds of different sizes. There's nothing wrong with them.
No.
Okay, they're not expensive.
They're not expensive.
Okay, that's the thing. You can buy 50, take your kids out fishing, it's fine. I'm not saying you can't catch fish on these. That's not what I'm saying. But
no, you're right.
As far as, I think the key about that is just make sure you get the right size for what fish you're really going after, right?
That's a common mistake.
So
people using too big a float for what they're trying to catch,
So coming off of those, we get into now these types of floats that are now more like these traditional ones that came out. And I've got a few here. That are these traditional stick floats that we found, right? These are a little older.
I dug
these
those
are spring. Right? We still sell a lot of these. All kinds of different sizes. Once again, a little bit tapered, right? A little bit different. But some are bigger, some are smaller, some are really thin. And so talk a little bit about these. What do you think these are?
Well, okay, I've over the years, I've used these a lot, when I was a kid and everything. And they're a good float, and they, like we said earlier about the red and white floats, they're kind of inexpensive. They don't really cost a lot. And we used to call these pencil floats. This one right here looks about the shape of a pencil. I don't know why, in my mind, I always like the slimmer one better than I did the round one. I don't know why I always chose that, but I just like this one better. But what's nice about this float, it's got a spring down here, and you wrap your line around one time, like we talked about the other floats,
Yep.
but it creates a pinch point, right? But when you have your line going from here down to your bait and your lure, just like we talked about on the round floats, when you go to twitch this float, guess what? This is like a pendulum action. It comes up and down, up and down. It's making your bait really active just with a light twitch of the rod, which this is a good thing about this float because it's long and narrow and this part sticking down really can give you, and you can fish it real slow too.
Right.
That's what's cool about this. Okay, now the downfall on this float is just like we talked about on the other float. When you wrap your line around that notch in there, it's hard to see from here.
Yep.
That creates a pinch point, and you get. It's not bad if you have small fish, right? Because they're not going to put a lot of pressure on that. But you catch several big fish, you get excited, and you forget to retie or forget to slide it up the line.
Right.
It'll break at that point. You'll reel the float in, and you haven't got any fish. But
And once again, I've put those on before, and they're great. But when I put it around, then I'm like, I wrap it twice,
there you go.
so it doesn't move.
Yeah,
Because I get tired of messing with it.
you don't want it to move. Yeah, that's one of the most aggravating things. If you have a float on one of these, I call these floats fixed floats because they're fixed
Right.
to your line. They're not a slider or a what I call a slip float. These are called fixed floats to me. Well, anyway, when you have that on your line like that, and you're sitting there putting a lot of pressure on it with those fish, just like we were talking earlier. When you take your line back off of here, you'll see that real tight curl in your line, and it will, that'll get you more than anything with this type float. But you know, when you're fishing close range and the smaller bobbers and this balsa wood, I call it a float, these work really well. I mean, inexpensive, and like I said, but you just got to be careful with the
spring.
pinch point. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. That.
So as we move on, we then the evolution continues, and we've gone from the pencil floats, you call them.
Yep.
But now these pencil floats have turned into what we call slip floats.
Right. Right.
Okay, and the slip floats really start getting to the point where, you know, here we are, we got our float, right? And whatever float I'm using, and I decide I want to fish 8 feet deep.
Right.
That means I have to drag this thing 8 feet,
Yeah.
and then I have to cast 8 foot of line
There you go.
way out, which is terrible.
It is.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Okay.
And guess what? When you hook a fish and you've got 8 foot of line out, you'll reel your bobber will come to the top of your pole and your fish is still down here in the water.
That's right.
So guess what? You're
That's
either
right.
walking back on the bank or you're walking back in the boat trying
Right.
to lift him over.
Or if you're fishing a pond, then you have that moss and you're all up in the weeds and all that stuff trying to get your fish
Lord.
out. So
Yeah. Right.
they came out with, and I've got a package here that what you could do is you could buy a slip float, right? And, and I've got some older ones here. This is an older slip
That's
float,
an
right?
old antique there.
This is an old antique slip float.
Yep.
And basically what happens is this way is that you put, I think this is kind of how they did it before, is that you would take a string.
Yes.
With this just kind of a straw. You slide a straw on your line, pull the string off, make a knot, right?
Right.
And then you put this.
You put a bead on next. And
Oh,
then
your
you put
bead,
this
that's
on.
right. You put your bead
Yeah.
on next, and then you put this on.
You slide this through.
All right.
Right. Then after it goes through there, you go down and you put
Your weight.
your weight and your swivel and your
And your
hook,
hook.
your leader from your
Right.
there. And what I've been doing, and I used to not do it many years ago, I didn't have any, but we sell a kit and we put a cushion that goes between the float. Well, in fact, I have one rigged up over there. We'll look at it here in a minute. What about that? Yeah, get that green and yellow float over there.
Right here?
No, yeah, right there. Yeah, you got it. And we'll look at it a little closer. I'll show you.
Yeah, sure.
This,
Hold on a minute.
yeah.
Our
That,
studio's not big enough.
well, I know it. That's a big old rod, but
That's okay.
anyway, here we go. We'll get this off here a little bit where you can, where everybody can look at it. See this right here?
Yep.
That's just a rubber cushion. There's your sinker that we talked about. There's a cushion. I'll usually use a soft bead there. And what happens, this protects your knot when your sinker goes down and it goes against your swivel. Years ago, I didn't do that, and I would lose a lot of fish. My knot would get frayed down here, and it would break off right
That's
here.
right.
Yeah. So these are like little shock absorbers.
That's right.
Between there, and that protects your float and the sinker. So I recommend using those, because if you get a fish a lifetime, say you got a 50-pound fish, you've never caught one that big, and it breaks off here because your knot's frayed,
Right.
you're going to be sick.
That's
so,
right.
you know, but that's good. Everybody can see that.
So one of the neat things about it is, and since we're talking about bluegill floats before we get into big catfish floats, is like these are some small slip floats, and when they make all kinds. Right? And these are just the small, and you put the bead on, put your swivel on. If you want a swivel, if you don't, you just clamp on a split shot weight.
Yes,
put your hook on.
that's all you need.
And then basically you just move the string up and down, or you can use a rubber stopper.
Yes.
Which is actually easier to use than a string. I prefer the rubber stopper over the string.
Right.
But the string is smaller profile to go through a really small light eye, right?
Right. Well, we just did a video the other day on bobber stops, and I'll tell you, there's one better than that yet. It's called Speed Stop.
Okay.
It's a little dog bone type sleeve, tiny. It's got a hole on each end. You stick the line through one hole, and you only wrap it one time around the middle of the dog bone, and you stick it back through. Well, when you wrap it around once in the middle of that line, it creates tension enough, and it will actually cast through your eyes. Like some of the smaller rods I have for crappie, the eyes are small. This little dog bone made by Speed Stop, it'll go right through your eyes. You won't even know it's on there. And it's lightweight. When that split shot, you know, it'll stand your float.
So is it like the old dog bones inside the old weights that we talked about earlier today?
No,
or is it just like a little bitty rubber
It's
piece?
a little tiny plastic thing, and we did a video on it earlier, and I don't see any right now I have handy.
Okay.
But those things are really neat. I highly recommend those when you're using line from 6-pound test up to 12 or 14. They're great. But when you get to the bigger line, the heavier line, like your 30-pound test up to 80-pound braid, then you want to go with the stops that you had there.
Yeah.
The rubber stops and the these right here, the tide stops. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I have my favorites. This is probably my least favorite, because every time I used to use these, the knot would become frayed and it would slide up and down the line. Then I'd have to cut my whole rig off and put another one on. Well, I met a guy here about a month ago that him and his wife make these by hand, and they're using some type of string. I don't know what it is, but he told me to try them. I went home and tried them and pulled them, and oh my gosh, that thing stayed on my line, and I was able to move it up and down. And he said you can fish a full 8 hours with these stops, and they won't come apart on you.
Wow.
Like I used to have problems with them. I don't know about these. These probably okay, but I know that these work, and I highly recommend.
Well, I have a lot of guys that come in, and some prefer the string, some prefer the rubber stops, and it's just I think we're used to these because the bass guys, we use these a lot to peg our weights and things like that. And I know the catfish guys like these too.
That's a good stop.
So
there's nothing wrong with that one.
And I think the cylindrical is good instead of the big bulky, right?
You're right. I prefer the cylinder shaped ones over the round ones, because the round ones I keep talking about hanging up in your eyes when you cast. So yeah, I like that stop.
Is there any reason we should use a slip? Like, I don't think there's any reason. I would never go fishing without a slip bobber on. That's just me. Is there any reason to use the spring over the slip? Except for ease of use, I've already had it tied on, and I put the spring on. Is there? Well, if I'm let's talk about bluegill, crappie, those types of things before we get into some of the other ones. Is there any?
Yeah. Well, yeah. One convenience of these type floats, they've got the spring and the hook on there. You get it on, and then if you decide you're going to fish on the bottom, and you don't want to fish on top, you just take it off, unclamp it, take it off, and there you go.
Great point.
Well, and they're inexpensive. We talked about that earlier, and that makes a good thing. But you don't, if you're fishing, I would say between 4 or 5 foot deep at the most. These fixed floats, they work great, but if you go any deeper than that, then you want to go to a slip float. Say you find some fish out off of a bar and they're like 8 or 10 foot deep, then you always want to go to a slip float to be able to adjust your depth to get down. But these are convenient and they're good for shallow water. And
or the pencil floats, right?
Or the pencil floats
with the spring on it.
Yeah, they're both.
But
good.
I think what the good point is, I didn't even think about it, is that if I want to fish on the bottom really quick and I want to try that, then I on the slip float, I got to cut the line, take it all off.
Oh yeah.
Right. Do all that, and then that's
It's aggravating. That's what I told you about when I had those string stops before. When I had to cut my line and re-rig everything, especially at night, you can't halfway see. It'd make you mad.
Yeah, it can get frustrating quick.
Hey.
So let's move on. So we have, listen, there's all kinds of pictures we took. We got these cork floats, all these cool things, right?
Yeah.
And but things have really started to ramp up. And as I started getting into catfish floats, and I've already been accused. I said, hey, do you want to get some catfish bobbers? And they no, Kent, they are floats.
You're right.
They're not bobbers.
Yeah.
These are bobbers, the red and white ones.
Yeah.
These are catfish floats, and there is an array. There is a following.
Oh yeah.
Okay. There is custom. There is lighted. There are different shapes, sizes. It is amazing to me.
Yeah.
The amount of different catfish floats, and so, but what triggered me to yours is just the sheer. I don't know how to say this the right way. I mean, can you say it's a gorgeous float, right? Like I think it's a good-looking float, and I think it makes a difference. And I think people talk about how it flies better and casts better and certain things. So let's start by just the basic regular float, and let's just talk about them a little bit, right? On your I want to say, and we have to do. I think. Randy, if you could pull up the picture of the 4.
Oh yeah.
Up now.
Okay, so I have these 3. I know they're one's different color, but I have these 4 size floats, and these are all your standard floats.
That's it. Yep. That's a standard design right there.
Standard design, and this is the design that you have worked on and perfected over these last years when you were building.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about. We'll just start with the main.
Okay.
That's easier, I think, easier to see for everybody.
Yeah.
So,
well, I tell you about this float. This one's one of our most popular models. It's 10-inch big cat. People seem to like it, especially the guys that are fishing for big catfish and tournaments and things like that. This is one of their favorites. Part of what makes this float really good, first of all, we use balsa wood, which is a really buoyant wood. It floats real well. I've tried different things over the years, styrofoam and different materials, and I never could get anything to float like balsa wood. Okay, the next thing is the weight down on the bottom. This is very important too, because I used to use lead before I went to brass, but I went to brass for health reasons and not pouring all that lead all the time. But anyway, to try to get something as heavy as lead, which is really dense and heavy, and match it with something as light as balsa wood and get everything to work together, that's quite a balancing act to get it to go out there. And you'll hear me talk about balance all the time on floats. A balanced float always works better than unbalanced float. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But anyway, let's go to the shape and the design of this float. It's kind of bullet shaped right here, as you can see. And you know, I told you earlier, I always like everything tapered to go down.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's a little bit wide on this end. You know, when you throw a dart, and you know how it's weight forward on the end and it wants to stick, the accuracy of a dart. Well, look at a rifle cartridge, the bullet, the bullet end of that, how sharp it comes to the point. Well, that's what I kind of tried to do here. So when you throw this, it'll give you a lot better accuracy to go where it's supposed to go. But getting the correct amount of weight per size of the float with the balsa wood, that's a trick too. That's a lot of trial and error and everything out there testing these things to get them to balance right. And so the design of this makes it quite a bit, you can see aerodynamic the way it's going. But what I did here, I cut it down through the body, the midsection, to where you don't have a lot of float sticking out of the water up top here. So when a fish gets that, it goes down. There's not much resistance here for them to pull this float down. So this was built for casting and accuracy. This part was built for resistance. When a float gets this, they don't have something real big to pull under like we talked about earlier. So just ideally, I wanted a float that would cast without a lot of effort, you know, that you can feel it when you grab the end of this. It's kind of just kind of throw it like you would a dart.
Right.
And can you feel the weight on the end?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that thing will really cut the
I mean,
air.
you want to feel like it feels like a bullet.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And so that's why the shape of that is, you know, we came up with that the way it was. Also, this serves another purpose. We talked about this earlier. This larger part here makes this an ideal float when it's real windy. This larger part will cut the wind like a dart. Also, in the wind, when it stands up, you've got some body down here. It will help stabilize the float up top when it's drifting around. If your float is basically the same shape all the way through, what'll happen, it'll get top heavy out there in the wind sometimes, and you'll see it rocking like that, a float, because the top is no different than the bottom, and this kind of anchors it. This larger part just kind of anchors that float in position. So there's another thing that comes up on these floats. Everybody thinks, I put that line on there, that's a general idea of where you want it, but some guys prefer to have the float just a little bit, you know, a little bit sticking up. It's kind of a matter of preference. So then you can add or subtract weight to make it float the way you want it to, but this is a good general area where you want this.
That's a good point. So on
Yep.
that float, on your packaging, if you flip it on the back,
Right.
it actually will tell you, I think it's a 1/2 ounce lenience, right? It tells you somewhere like
Yes.
3/4 to 1 1/4 ounce,
Yes.
ounce to 1.5 ounces, or
Right.
vice versa, what type of weight you should use.
Yes, that's why we did that, because you know, when I first started selling floats, that was, I got that question so many times. Guys said, well, how much weight do I need to start off with this thing? I didn't have it on the package. So I never thought about it too much. I know how much I want to put on there to make it work right.
Right.
So I went out and I wrote down on our new labels, we started putting the recommended weight. Now that weight is a ballpark. It'll get you right about where you need to go, but it's not a definite, because some guys have preferences on how high they want the float to fish.
Right.
You can add to that, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, so in that model, you've got, I know you called this these are the standards. You got a 6-inch standard,
Yes. Yes.
8-inch standard.
Right.
You got the one you were just talking about, which is the 10-inch.
Yep.
And then you have the 12-inch, which is actually the Super Cat, which is brand new, right? I mean,
Yep.
that's a big float.
That is a big float.
So a little bit, what I've learned here is that the 6-inch standard is more around the channel cats.
Right, smaller fish, channel cat. That's what's recommended for. This float also works good for walleye.
Okay.
If you notice, I've got a W on there.
Okay.
This is an ideal size. We have a lot of saugeye and walleye, or mainly saugeye where I'm at. You can take this float, and there's not much of it out of the water. It casts good and gets you out, but it also works great for channel cat. This is one of my favorites. Yep.
Okay. 8-inch, you just basically you're just kind of going up.
Right. Well, what happens if you go to a lake and you see that you need to cast farther, that you can't get your 6-inch, kind of like if you're bass fishing and you usually need a heavier jig to get into where you're at. Well, say if it's windy and you need to cast a little bit farther, this is the same style float. It's just a little longer, and you can put a little more weight down here. That's all it's.
That's mostly the 8.
Yep. That's the 8. This is a good channel cat float too.
Okay.
Yep. Right.
So 6 and the 8.
Yes.
And then you got the 10, which we just talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's more the traditional, hey, I'm at the trophy lake catching some bigger fish, right?
Right. Guys that tournament fish and stuff, for the big fish, they like these larger floats because they're using bigger baits.
That's probably my most common when it comes to the big, big cats.
This one, this is probably our best seller, the 10-inch big cat. It just seems like it hits all the spots on it. It'll get you out there, but yet it'll still hold a fairly large bait, and it's a good compromise between all the different floats. So, yeah, that's real.
And then I have some guys that come in, okay, and they want to fish with big goldfish or big salties, and I mean, you know, if they fish with a big bullhead channel cat or something like that they want to fish, then, you know, you've got to have something to hold a quarter. I mean, I've got fish in there that are 1/4 pound.
See,
right?
And that
float won't hold it.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
And so they have the big cats,
and
the super cats, I should say.
Right. And if that float did hold it, that bait would pull it all around.
Right.
Where you can get this and put enough weight down here at the bottom near your bait, it'll anchor it out there, and it's heavy enough that your bait can't really pull it around like they can with the smaller ones. Another reason for this 12-inch model, I had guys requesting it for several years. There are some lakes where they want to get out to a sandbar, say they're fishing from the bank, and the 10-inch model with the weight wouldn't get them out there where they needed to go. So they could add more weight down here at the bait, down here near their bait, a larger egg sinker, and they could launch this thing and get it out where they needed to go.
So they're taking 10, 12-foot rods.
Oh, yeah.
Big Abby Garcia type reels, right? Round reels.
Yeah.
And casting
80-pound test braid.
Yeah, throwing 12-inch floats
a mile.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And you can cast them a mile.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't want to be on the other end of one. The way they throw those things.
So that's one series.
Right.
You just introduced a new series.
Yes.
And so that's the next picture, the 3, Randy.
Yeah.
So you introduced this new series, and this is called the Super Fat Boy.
Yeah.
And you got a few of these. And then we'll go through these, and then I want to do some comparisons.
Okay.
So this is the 9-inch, 7-inch, 5-inch.
Right.
Give us a little description about.
Okay. Yeah. Let's take this 9-inch. This is a Super Fat Boy. We just talked about that 12-inch there being able to hold a lot of weight for people that like to fish with large baits. Well, as you can see from this float, it's kind of short and compact, but you can see the profile of it is really thick. What we did, this float works almost opposite of what the other 10-inch, the standard series. We didn't put as much weight down here in the bottom. That way we could add more weight down near the bait. You can put up to 2 ounces of weight down here near your bait, or even more depending on the size of your goldfish or your bluegill or whatever. But this float was, I had guys requesting this. Can you make a float that, what happens with your 10-inch standard here, we talked about this earlier, when you have a large bait on there, it's kind of pulling it around in tight circles out there and it's skirting off and you're watching your float and the bait's pulling around. Well, this one, you can put enough weight down here at the bottom that will anchor it right there where it's supposed to go, and that bait is limited to how far it can swim around and not drag your float all around. And it will hold a larger bait than this one will. You know, that's the big feature of this Fat Boy series. Plus, sometimes you're not casting that far. Some lakes are short and long and narrow, and you don't really need this big long float to get to the middle. This is kind of an overkill if you're not casting far and you've got this big long float, where this is short and compact. You throw it out and it stays put. It's holding your weight and holding your bait and your weight in place. But this is an ideal float under certain conditions. Guys that fish in rivers, you know, where there's an eddy that swirls around, they're fishing for big catfish, they like this. It wouldn't work good in current, but it would work good in an eddy or a cove of a lake where you're really camping out on a spot. We have a lake up where I live, Indian Lake. It's kind of a big reservoir. And those guys go out at night and they catch a lot of big flatheads out there, and they'll find some underwater logs, structure and that, and they'll anchor down, and they'll more or less camp out on that spot for several hours because they know anytime a big one could come through there. Well, they like this Fat Boy series because they're in a boat, they're not throwing that far, and this thing just stays put right where it's at, and it just sits there and chugs. And it's ideal for, under certain conditions, this is the float you want to use.
Okay.
Yep.
You do have a couple other sizes.
Yes, yes.
So, walleye again?
Walleye and channel cat.
Okay.
This little guy's compact. It's just a cute little float to throw out there. And like I said, you can put more weight down here on this one than you can some of the others. Yeah.
Same thing on 7-inch.
7-inch,
if I need to cast a little further.
Yes.
So
yes.
forth.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that's those series. But before we get to the crappie series and talk a little bit about those, I want to chat a little bit about these. You also sell these cool kits.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And I think you have a picture of these that you can show, Randy. So what's neat about these is that I think you come in 6, 8, and 10.
Right.
And so for those that know how to rig, they're going to go, they could buy packs. They could go pack your bobber stops, your beads. Some like glass beads, some like your cushion that you buy and weight. But what you've done here is just made these nice little packs. I'll do them like this. I know you got a picture of them up, but basically they have the bobber stops, the bead you need, the cushion you want, the right swivel, the weight, and it's for this big cat. So if I was going to go buy a 10-inch big cat, which is right here, I can partner this up with this And this kit is all I need is these two things and my hook, and I'm ready to go.
You're ready to go. Yep, that's why we did that, because I noticed guys would come in a tackle shop, especially if they've never rigged slip floats before. They're looking all over the place for a bead, for a swivel, for the sinker, and they're all over. So I put it all in one package, and that way, that eliminates a lot of that. You just, like you said, you match up 10-inch Big Cat with the 10-inch float, you pull it off, and you're in the game. The only thing I didn't put in was the hook, and the reason for that, fishermen, you know how they are. One guy likes one size hook, one guy likes another.
And there's different brands.
Yes.
You know,
so.
and that's a whole nother show.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
on hooks. We're not going to get into octopus circle versus octopus versus, you know, Kaylee hooks.
Like
and
you
all
said,
kinds of
that's a
stuff.
whole show right there.
It's a whole show. So, so you have these cool little things that go that automatically, so you can purchase your float, get your kit,
Yes.
all right, and then move on. But once again, on the back of each float, you tell a little bit about what weights and all that, and you can go pick. I mean, once it's after there, you're basically modifying what beads you want. If you want different colored beads and stops.
Exactly.
And a trick I showed, I left it over there, but no, it's okay. You can take coax cable.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if people know this, but you can actually take some coax cable and rip the insides out and use that as your cushion. Did you know that?
Well, yeah. Yeah, you can.
You can.
Yeah, I've heard of that before. And
So if you've got any old coax cable at home, right?
Yep.
You can cut, right? Rip the insides out and then cut those into pieces and use them for your cushion.
Also heard of people getting a thick-walled rubber hose.
Yep.
That has a small hole in the middle.
That's
and
right.
cut little sections of that. And
That's right.
Yeah.
So just if you have that at home, and because you just don't, you sell it in your kit, that nice little cushion. But if you don't find the cushion, you can't just walk up and buy a pack of Eagle Claw cushions.
No,
okay?
those are kind of hard to find, yeah.
So it's something to think about that you could modify those. So I've seen people use those as well. Yeah.
One more thing about this kit. These beads, there's two in there. One's hard and one's soft. The hard bead goes up on top where your bobber stop is. The soft bead goes down to your swivel for your cushion. That's a cushion and that's a cushion. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know there's a hard and a soft bead.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even realize
and
that
right
myself.
here on the directions up there.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
and there is a soft one. You're sure?
You see the soft one?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right. It does. It says it.
See, you learned something.
Look at there. I always learn something. That's why you're here to talk about the evolution of floats.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
Don't give me a hard time now.
Oh, well.
But that's what this show's for. You're supposed to give me a hard time.
Okay.
So a couple of things I noticed, and especially when getting these floats in, I'm going to dig through here and find these two floats because it's super interesting. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So we have this nice 6-inch standard walleye type float, channel catfish. I've sold a lot of them for channel cats. We got a lot of channel cat lakes around here.
Oh, yeah.
They go. But there's also this 6-inch stealth walleye bait,
right?
Which, by the way, resembles a little bit of the Fat Boy shape.
Yep.
Okay, but has a little bit different weight on it versus this nice smooth weight of your standard.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of reasoning between the two?
Okay, I'll tell you the difference. Basically, these two floats will hold up the same amount of weight. Quarter-ounce egg sinker works well on both of them. Okay, we talked about it a little bit earlier. This shape float, when it's windy, will cut the wind better, and it'll also stay anchored better because of the shape down at the bottom, up to here. Well, the stealth, on the days, you know, when you get, there's not a lot of wind, you got your high blue days and everything's kind of shut down, this float has a thinner profile, as you can see right through here, and it's a better float. I mean, if they breathe on it, it's going to go down. It's just the way it's designed. It'll cast basically on a calm day. This float will cast as far as this one, but on a windy day, this float will cast farther just because of the way it's shaped.
Right.
You know, the bullet shape. That's the main difference. When I'm kind of finesse fishing, when things are really tough, I'll use the stealth. But if the wind picks up and it gets rough out there and everything, I may switch out to this float here just because it's more stable.
Okay.
Those are the two things, and we try to create our floats there again that go down to here where there's not a lot of resistance, and there again, getting the weight to balance here is a big key. And I think that's a lot in fishing floats is balance. I don't care if you're fishing with a little crappie float or large, getting the right amount of weight on the bottom to where this thing is not sticking out of the water and rocking around. That's what you want in a float. Also, you want to be able to cast well.
No,
Design
it's
where it'll
super
cast.
important. I mean, I get
Yeah.
a lot of feedback. I constantly ask a lot of the customers here fishing, catfishing, because look, I grew up bass fishing. I didn't
Right.
grow up a lot of these pay lakes and catfishing, going the river and all these things. And so this is new to me. 10-foot rods, these big, huge floats.
Oh man,
It's a big thing, right?
It's getting bigger.
And it's getting much bigger.
Yeah.
And so just the whole, so I asked them, and they're like, these floats I like because they cast a mile. They cast better. They do cut through wind better.
Right.
But we also get to, which is another thing for me, lighting your floats fishing at night.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so we've talked about the evolution of these floats, but there's all types of lighted floats out there.
There are.
There's ones that are plastic, that are small, have a little battery in them, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yep.
But what I found, and that's nothing against any of those floats. They're great floats, and
Right.
people
Right.
use a lot of those floats. But
Yeah.
what I have consistently found is that as we go through these LEDs, a lot of guys don't know that you can purchase, and I'm going to use Weekend Warrior Fish and Tackle. This is a local guy in Kentucky, friend of mine, David, out of Stamping Ground. And so he makes these
Right.
basically LED lighted sticks.
Yes.
And so what the guys are doing, right, is they're
Yep.
taking this and they're just basically electrical taping it to your float.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's what you do.
And so why do you think, let me ask this, is LED going to ever be integrated into the float
Yes.
versus having to do this, or what's the future
Yes,
a little bit?
it will be. I'm working on that right now, and I've run into some snags, and I'm working on it. I'm trying to make a top where the LED light is in the float. What we've run into with the other floats that do have the LED lights in them, they have a rubber gasket O-ring where it screws together. You
Right.
put in your batteries and
Right.
everything, and eventually that O-ring will kind of dry rot, and it'll crack and it'll leak water into your float. Well, then it'll short circuit everything once your batteries get corroded and everything. And that's a problem, and I'm working on trying to eliminate that O-ring out of there and get something that seals up tight and get the right LED light. Some LED lights will really suck the power out of your battery, because what we found out testing LED lights, red LED light will consume a lot more energy than a green or a blue. And I wouldn't have known that, though light's a light. So all things considered, we're trying to get a energy efficient light that'll make your batteries last longer.
Yeah.
And get a top that will seal up without water leaking in. And that, until I get that and it works right, I'm not going to put it on the float. I'm just going to go ahead with taping the light sticks or the LED light on for now. But we're working on that.
I mean, I think the advantage of these are right now is that there's 10, 15, 12 colors you can pick from.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
what's
there's
cool.
pink, blue, green, orange, red,
Yeah.
white, chartreuse, and
Some of them blink even.
yeah, some of them blink
Yeah.
and rainbow.
Yeah.
I've seen them, and so you can basically just electrical tape, which I didn't even know that's what they did.
Yeah.
But you can electrical tape. I mean, they have the old, they've evolution into they've got these batteries that you can pull up, and they make green. Then you clip those on.
Right.
They make
Can't you just tape a lightning bug?
lightning bug. You can't put a lightning bug on a float.
That would work.
A lightning bug, just perfect.
Okay.
It does have chartreuse light though. So, but then they make some of the just brake sticks, the old traditional brake sticks that you slide, and there's nothing wrong with those.
Yeah.
They work great on these type of floats. In fact, I would probably recommend, if you were using a small float like this and you're fishing at night, that the little brake sticks
The
that
tiny
you just
ones.
slide on the top
Yes.
actually work better.
Yeah, on a small float. Yeah.
Versus throwing a big LED that's half the size of this.
Right. They've come a long way since the brake sticks. The brake sticks, what's neat about them, you can buy a big package of them, but they start getting dim after a couple hours. You throw it away, tape another one. And the electrical tape, it's soft and it's kind of easy on your float when you put it on there without peeling it off and tearing all your paint off. Yeah.
Right. Speaking of paint, man, has it changed?
Oh gosh, yeah. That's why I brought these two old floats here. These floats were made right here by the Dayton There was a Dayton float company in Ohio back in the 40s and 50s, and these are antique floats. And when Herb and I started making floats, you could only paint your floats red or light red like this, or black, or yellow, or white. They didn't have all the nice fluorescent colors they do now. Paint has come a long way. So many, it's getting better all the time, the more variety of the colors. But these stand out so much better than the old floats, as you can see just looking at them. But this is all the guys had to work with, so I'm not knocking. This is best they could do at that time. But the paint and everything's come a long way on fishing floats. I've noticed other companies, not just mine, they've got neat, you have one here, float, whoops,
Nope.
that little blue one or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, other companies are even coming up with real neat paint schemes on their floats, just like I am, you know. So yeah, that's come a long way, Kent, since over the years.
Yeah, and I noticed that yours are, you clear coat them.
Yeah.
Right? And so I do want to make it clear. These are balsa floats.
Yeah.
They are not made of metal.
Right.
If you throw and hit a big rock,
Yeah.
it's not good for your float.
No, balsa
Okay.
wood. Balsa wood is extremely soft wood. It's kind of like a pulp almost. Balsa wood's, it only grows in South America. Yeah, you can only get it. Ecuador's a big exporter of balsa wood, and I think Brazil. But they have balsa trees there. I looked all this up. I wanted to know where it comes from. And they grow straight up in the round, and they grow really fast, but they're like in the tropical rainforest. They need that. Balsa wood needs that type. Balsa trees need that type of environment. But anyway, most of the balsa wood, well, all of it you get here in the United States is imported. We don't grow it here. But it has such a unique feature to it that it's real buoyant and it's really light, which makes it easy to work with when you're building floats. And it just floats better than, like I said, I've tried a lot of different things, and I haven't found anything yet compared to balsa wood.
Right.
Something that's close that we didn't talk about that I'm still experimenting with. Remember the old cork?
Yeah.
You get a stopper out of a bottle, and you get a cork and drill a hole and put a stick in it, the old timers. You wouldn't believe the guys that still call these bigger floats corks. That I work with the older guys.
In fact, I'm glad you said that, because they do call them corks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of still in cork floats.
So that little guy right there, cork, what I'm getting back to, cork floats really well too. This is, next to balsa wood, I like cork. The only thing I found out with cork, when you try to build a longer float out of cork, it starts to get real loose, it gets flimsy, it doesn't stay solid, yeah. And I'm afraid the longer it gets, the less it would hold up as far as breaking in half.
Right.
But on short floats, on the small ones and stuff, I think cork is a good choice next to balsa wood.
What about burl wood? I like burl wood furniture because it's really light.
Well, yeah.
Easy to move.
I'll tell you a funny story about.
Of course, Randy, burl wood is what you're asking about.
Yeah, well, I want to tell you a quick story on this. This guy came out to float out to the lake years ago. His name was Joe. He fished with us a lot. He said, "Heck with your balsa wood floats. I've got a float here that will outdo anything you've got." Well, he made it out of cedar or basswood or something like that. Wow. This thing, he could cast it a mile. I mean, it was awesome. It would outthrow my floats and everything. He said, "There's nowhere I can't reach now." I said, "Okay, cool." Well, what happened when he went to reel it in, the float went under, he reeled it in a little bit and he wanted to stop and his float was gone. I said, "Well, Joe, where's your bobber?" I said, "You got a bite?" I said, "Go ahead and jerk." And he says, "Well, no, I haven't got a bite. I don't see my line going out." And then it finally pops up. It was real heavy. The float itself was real heavy through here because of the wood. All the weight was in the wood he used. But when it went down, it just stayed waterlogged underwater, and it stayed down for a long time. It wouldn't pop up like this.
Right.
So it was a neat idea, but it didn't work. So
Yeah.
I learned from him mistake. I'm not going to make any out of the cedar or
right.
balsa wood, you know.
That's right.
But anyway, like I said, I've tried a lot of different woods, and like he said, burl wood and that. You know, there's so many designs of floats. Oh man,
listen,
I'm telling you what.
There's all kinds of designs.
Every shape and color. It's kind of like bass lures, you know.
Yeah.
You'll get a crankbait, a certain brand, and there may be 50 different companies making crankbaits, and
That's
some
right.
are plastic, some are balsa, whatever, and it's the same way with fishing floats.
Well, I mean, the bass world, I mean, you got balsa wood, but And then there's a big following there.
Yeah.
There's a huge following of balsa baits. They're coming back.
I
And
used
some
to
of the
like those
originals
Bagley balsa bees.
Yeah,
when I fished them
they're
for bass a lot. Yeah,
classic. You know, and there's a lot of sought after lures that left balsa and went to plastic, and now you can't.
right.
They're expensive.
Yeah, and then the way back to plastic floats. There's a
Yeah.
lot of them out there, and floats. They all do the job. They will all work for you one way or the other. It's just some of them work better than others. That's what
Well, I mean, it's just like bass baits, or anything else. Sometimes bluegill's going to catch fish better that night than bluegill the next, than goldfish the next night, and so forth.
That's
and I
fishing.
think that it is fishing.
Yep.
But I think that what we're getting after is that floats do make a difference.
They do.
Whether it's corks, whether it's floats, whether it's bobbers, whatever you want to
You're
say.
right. You're absolutely right.
I think your type of fishing is that. So what that brings me to, right, is that you have.
Thought you forgot.
I'm getting there. What that brings me to is that you are working on some new, really cool crappie floats.
Right.
I've asked you about these. I've wanted them to come on in, but
Yeah.
we're going to wait till the spring.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
They'll be here.
They'll be here.
Yep.
But we're excited about them.
Uh-huh.
And some new crappie floats.
We've
and
got
I think we took some pictures.
We got those.
Show the
Yep.
picture, right?
Right.
But I gotta pick non-green ones.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stick with the orange.
Also,
Okay.
Ian, could you get me that green pole with that little orange float on
No, the other one.
it? Yeah, right there. Yep. We'll talk about it here in a minute too.
Yeah. So
Thank you,
these
sir.
are pretty unique. Tell us a little bit about these types of crappie floats.
Okay.
Besides, once again, the tapered bottom.
Yes. And these floats, over the years, I always called them stick floats. Why? Because you've got a little stick that you put it in. That's you put your line through, you put the little stick in the end, and that stops it wherever you want it, and it will slide up and down the line. And these are lightweight balsa wood, and like I said, I've got them shaped to where they'll go down easily. But these are ideal I have different sizes for.
No, I mean
Here's two right here. There you
different
go.
sizes, right? Like small.
Yeah, those are good
Yeah.
for bluegill and crappie right there, by the way. And I saw the A1 is a real good one for like a 1/32 ounce jig. When you're fishing for crappie
Yeah.
or trout or something like that. Works really nice, lightweight, goes down good. And it's got a plastic tube through the middle too. Kind of helps you protect your stick when you put it in there, the little tube that it fits in. That's another feature about those. But then I have them in different sizes because some people like to fish with live bait for crappie or whatever and use a bigger minnow. Well, then we've got one a little bit bigger that'll hold a little bigger split shot and hold it up. These lines I put on the float, that is a good general area where you would like your float to be sitting in the water. That's why I put a line on all my floats. But that's not an absolute. If you prefer it to stick out a little more, don't add as much weight. Or if you want it to sink a little further, like on the longer floats, add a little weight. So that's just a good general area.
Awesome. And those are out now.
Yep. We have
you can
those.
get the stick floats now, and we'll have some.
Oh, good.
Right? We're going to have some soon. And then, but the new ones we're working on.
Yep.
You're going to show a little bit now?
Right. Here we go. This is a new slip float right here. It's going to be called the Crappie Killer. And this thing is 3 inches long, and it's got a small profile, and it looks similar to our other floats, right?
Yeah, it sure
got
does.
Got a bullet weight on the end. Okay, what's neat about this, I have 6-pound test line on this pole. And I have one big split shot right here. I've got a wire gold Aberdeen hook.
Traditional.
Right. What happens when you go out in a lake, and we talked earlier about fixed floats, you can only reel it up to your pole and 3 or 4 foot deep and you're done. You can set this float with that little dog bone bobber stop I talked about. You can set it 2 foot deep or 20 foot deep. That's what's neat about this float. And I've been working on these this spring. I fished them a lot for crappie and trout. I caught a lot of trout on these, by the way. But anyway, I found a drop off in a gravel pit. Came out, I could see the fish down there. It was a flat, came out, dropped off. I anchored the boat, and the fish that I could see on there looked like they were about 8 foot deep. It was early spring. I set this float at about 8 foot deep, threw out there, wasn't long at all, down it went. Caught a crappie. I couldn't keep 2 poles in the water. They were I hit right on them, you know, basically. But anyway, I got to use this. I was able to use this float enough to really see how well it was going to work under those conditions. Now, when I came up with this float, I made probably 12 models this shape, put the weight on it. I went out to the lake and tested it. I narrowed it down to only about 2 that I really liked. Then, out of those 2, I picked one that really worked well. That's the way it is in float building. Some of your best ideas, you think it's going to work great. You get out there and it doesn't work with a hoot, you know. So what I'm telling you about this float and all the floats we develop, we take them out and test them and make sure they're going to work like they should. But this is going to be a good one.
It reminds me a little bit of the mini Stealth.
This
got
one
a little
does.
bit of stealth to it.
Yes, but here's what you're going to like, and I don't have it with me. It's also going to come in this shape too, 3 inches.
Okay.
It's going to be a miniature one of these. So if it's windy and you want this instead of this, you're able to use the little 3-inch Crappie Killer standard.
Awesome.
Yeah. All that is brainstorm came to me one time. I said, why don't I make a miniature slip float that's weighted on the end?
Yeah.
And it hit me, and I said, well, I'm going to go out there and start turning some down now. And that's what we got. But it works great. I've already tried it, and so we're going to try to have them in production by this spring, where you can buy them.
Awesome.
Yep. And that's the thing about floats too. I'm always working and looking ahead. I mean, and I'm always willing to adjust on the floats I already have. If I see something that we could improve on, that's what we'll do. And it's all about catching fish. I want people to catch fish.
Well, I mean, that's why we do this, right?
Right. I want to make a product that will give them a little bit of an advantage when they're out on the water. And that's what's about. You want to see that rod, Ben?
Randy wants to eat fish.
Randy likes to
You're
eat
making
fish.
Me hungry.
Well,
You're making me hungry.
I wish you'd have been around when I had all them crappie.
Man, that's
Oh,
what I was
We'll go get you some crappie, Randy. Okay.
Next time I'm down.
We'll get you some.
fries. Oh.
You were invited to our crappie fry this year, but you couldn't make
Really?
it.
I wasn't
Yes,
invited?
you were, but you were watching fireworks at Reba.
Oh, he was at
You
Reba, huh?
had to
Oh, I was
record
working.
fireworks. You had to
Yeah.
work.
Working.
Yes, you were working.
Yeah. Well, I'll
Hey,
tell you what,
so-
Randy. Next time I'll bring you some fish.
Yep.
I'll bring you down some. Oh, I've got
Oh
them.
man.
Yeah, they're frozen, vacuum sealed, ready to go, filleted.
Oh,
How's that for a deal?
It's pretty good. It's a pretty good deal, Randy.
good deal right there.
Yeah, maybe you should reconsider your thoughts. There you go. Hey, let's. Where are we at on time, Randy?
We're almost at 8 o'clock.
Are we? Well,
Wow.
let's do this. It's been a great hour. Let's a couple of things. One, where do you think this industry is going with these floats? Now, I know it's a
goodness.
hard question
Yeah.
because, you know, you watch all these custom floats, custom paint jobs, like all the
Yeah.
different things are coming out. Guys are making up really cool floats. I mean, there's all kinds of
there
guys
are.
painting them, different
Yes.
colors, so forth.
Yes.
And so, where do you think the whole float industry, where do you see the future of it going?
Well, I think it's going to get more advanced than it is now, just like everything else. Technology's improving and everything, and people are willing to pay more for something that works better. And a lot of these guys up where I live are fishing in these catfish tournaments. I was at one this summer that I sponsored a few prizes for this tournament at Indian Lake. It's a pretty good sized lake, and then they had a big turnout. Well, anyway, it was a 3-day tournament. The winner brought home $3,400, first place. They gave out over $7,000 or $8,000 in prizes. Top 10, they won money. Well, there's bass tournaments that don't pay out payouts like that for first place. So for a guy to go out there, and it was a big fish tournament, whoever caught the biggest one, waded in, won. But and then there's so many tournaments going on at these lakes, at these pay lakes and pay ponds and stuff, and these guys are hitting several $1,000s on a weekend.
They are.
And so they're willing to buy the rods you were talking about, you know,
Yeah.
the expensive rods and reels and everything, and the floats, if that's part of it and it's going to help them win, they're going to buy them. I'll tell you, a lot of the guys that buy my floats that have been buying them for years are tournament fishermen, catfish tournament fishermen. And they'll do anything to get an advantage. One thing I want to tell you real quick.
Sure.
I have some guys, see this black float? They're superstitious. If they want a tournament using a float, a black float, well then they always want to buy the black float. And one guy told me, he said, I don't like your bright colors on the bottom. He said, I don't want that catfish to look up and see that bright orange float up there. If it's black, then he won't see it, you know? And so, I mean, I'm telling you,
I love it,
and they're so serious. I mean,
but they are dead. Listen, I shouldn't laugh. They are, listen, it's just as guys are particular about their hooks. I mean, there's no different than bass guys or anybody else, okay?
Exactly.
They come in, they've got their specific hook they want, specific color they want. I know people's favorite color. Some people don't care. We care about the color of the float.
Yeah, right.
You know, they just want to be able to see it.
Right. And that's another thing is visibility. You have people, we talked to a guy today, he has vision problems and he can't see that well, but he loves to fish and he wants a float out there that he can see in the water. And that's a big thing with the bright colors too.
Yeah, he wanted that. He wanted, and then we introduced him to like the little quirky float that goes on top of your float.
Right.
Because that's important. So a lot of times you might throw out, you're like, did the weight pull all the way through the float, or did it get tangled up and you don't really know, or am I hitting the bottom?
Right.
And so you'll find out, and if you have that little quirky and you can see it, and it's at the top with your LED light, then you'll know.
Absolutely.
But if you don't see it, because it's kind of hard to see the little bitty green bead sitting out there
you can't.
in the middle of the night.
You can't. And your bait may be out there wandering around all tangled up, and you're sitting there thinking, I hope I get a bite, and you reel it in an hour, and you find out, well, so those Corkies are a nice, they glow, don't they?
They glow off the light if you've got some light, but most people like it, you know, they'll glow off the LED
off
light.
the LED, that's what I meant. Yeah, right, right. So that's a good thing to have. But fishing floats are like anything else. Like you bass fish a lot, and you know all the details, the different size jigs and length of worms, and different size crankbaits, spinnerbaits, all that stuff makes a difference in catching fish. And all those small details, when you add them together, I think is what makes some people successful and some not. Right. Some people don't pay attention to details. So that's the same thing with fishing floats.
You know what they say, a lot of engineers that are super detailed are really great at fishing because they pick things apart.
Oh, right? Okay. Yeah, so well, that's true.
That has been said.
They look at what's wrong with something, don't they? Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. As far as the float, I think that, what is your advice? I think I grew up going, hey, if I fish a really small float, I'm fishing for a little bluegill. If I'm fishing with a really big float, I'm fishing for a really big fish. And I think that was just his grand scale of things. I think that's how we grew up. A lot of us grew up. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that, hey, there is a lot more to it. Right. And depending on if you're fishing in the wind, not in the wind, fishing in an eddy, fishing for this type of fish, what size your bait is, what different weight you want, and how far you want to cast it. There's a lot more into it.
Yeah.
And it's going to just get more, they're going to get more advanced.
It is. These guys, I mean, in these tournaments, they are dead serious. They're wanting to win, and it's no different in a bass tournament. And it's catching on. And another thing's catching on, you know, we're coming out with the crappie floats. We got guys up there, and that's all they fish for is crappie and crappie tournaments. Right. They're dead serious. They have crappie, and that's what they want to catch. So we're trying to get a float for these guys, too. Yeah. You know, that'll help them win their tournaments. That's catch more fish. Yeah, I tell you, one of the biggest mistakes I see when I'm out on the water, people fishing, is people using too large a float for the species of fish they're trying to target, right? They don't mean to, they don't know any better. Some of them think the bigger the float, the bigger the fish. Well, Byron Artrip's rule, use the smallest float that you can get by with and still get the job done. What I mean by that, if it'll cast and get you out where you want to go and hold your bait up at the correct level, there's no use putting any bigger float on than what you need. Reason being, when that fish takes that float down, I don't want him to know that he even has anything. It goes down and stays down. If they've got a big float and that fish, you've got a 2-pound catfish trying to pull that big 12-inch stealth under, he's going to drag it all around trying, but he can't get it to go under.
You think fish feel that and then let go?
They do,
you think,
all the time.
Honestly, fish can feel the tension?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I know that for a fact. I've been fishing beside people, and they'll have a big float, and that float will get dragging around, and they'll be leaning forward, and boy, they're wanting it to go under, and it just will never go under, and then it just pops up. The fish is gone. He's either got their bait or he gave up on it. Got wore out trying to pull that float around.
Right.
So I want it to go down and stay down, and you watch that line go tight. That's partly why these floats are designed the way they are for the resistance part. When they go down, we want them to stay down. And but yeah, use the smallest float you can get by with.
So, best advice, smallest float that you can get by with for the species that you are fishing for.
And it will still get the job done as far as getting you out where you need to go. And that's the whole thing. If you're using the smaller float and you can't get out to the middle of the lake where you want to, go to the next size up. But still, that's my theory. When a fish grabs on my bait, I don't even want him to know there's a float on there. That's
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you.
Sure.
For coming down.
Thank you for having me.
All the way from Dayton and hanging out with us today.
Oh, yeah.
You got to meet a lot of customers
yes,
today,
I did.
talk to them.
Yes.
And so that was exciting. And they had all kinds of questions for you. They enjoyed you today. So thanks for doing that. And then thanks for spending this hour with us. I think that this has been awesome.
Absolutely.
Just to go through the history of floats and talk about where we're going and where we're heading.
Yes.
I do want to say this here at the Cain Pole. We will have, we currently have, we are running low because I keep ordering floats from you. But we'll have the full line of Archer floats here, all the way from the 6-inch Stealth all the way up to the 12-inch Super Cat. And and then the Crappie floats, the stick floats, and then hopefully in the spring we will see some brand new ones coming out. For these new Crappie Killers.
Crappie Killers. Crappie Killers.
Right?
You got it.
Coming.
That's it.
I can't wait to see the packaging for that.
Oh yeah, I've got it.
I can't wait for my Crappie. That's right.
Yeah,
and
that's
Randy
right.
wants his Crappie.
That's right.
Randy, we have to take the Crappie Killers out and catch Crappie on them.
There you go.
And that's how we get them.
Catch
Then we'll come back and eat fresh Crappie.
What do you have to do?
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, all right, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah.
Thanks for this special, for coming out and hanging out with us tonight. We hope you had, hope you learned something, a little bit about floats and bobbers and corks, whatever you want to call them, pencil floats. And thanks again to Byron Artrip for coming down from Artrip Float Company. And hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Well, sure. Yeah, I'll
Awesome.
come back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, have a great night.
Yep.
Thanks you for tuning in.
All right.
Thanks for watching the Cain Pole Fishing Show. Visit the Cain Pole in Southern Hills Plaza or on Facebook. Thanks for watching and happy fishing. The Cain Pole Fishing Show is brought to you by Lewis Veterinary Downtown Clinic, Purdy's Coffee, Big Hill and Downtown, and the Paddy Wagon Irish Pub.